Hello everyone, John Maher here, and this is our weekly Grass10 update on the dairy age. Well, it continues to be difficult, and you could say we're playing against the wind when it comes to grazing. If we're not careful, the game could get away from us, really. And I suppose that's probably true for those who farm on dry land more so than those who farm on heavier land. Those who farm on heavier land, this is not as big as concern as you generally get going later anyway. However, conditions are challenging, land is challenging, and will probably remain so. So February has come wet almost every day, and grass growth has just been below average as well. So that's the kind of quick summary to start with. But the growth, I suppose, is a little disappointing for those who don't have as much grass, and I suppose this is just due to wetter weather. I suppose very little slurry or fertilizer being applied, and grazing being well behind because grazing stimulates grass to grow, which all feeds into why growth has been behind for the month of February. Saying that, like, let's be clear here, February is never a high growth month anyway. But now we're heading to 1st of March. Day length is coming, much longer, and we expect growth to pick up generally this time of year. I suppose at the same time we must recognize that there has been a good response to grass growth where slurry did get applied, particularly in January. I've also seen a very good response to fertilizer application where it got applied. Now there's not much of that happened, but it has worked, and the slurry in particular, to say the least. However, I suppose at this stage now we're coming to the 1st of March. From a grazing perspective, it has been challenging, but I think now we just have to try and get on with it and basically up our game. And the cows are now calved. Many cows in the herd are calved 4 or 5 weeks, and they're going to be crying out for a much better diet. So, but before I begin, then I will ask 5 questions, I suppose, that everybody has to answer who's trying to feed the cows well. And they need to be answered at this point because it's getting critical in many ways. And the first thing is there grass on the farm, right? Can grazing take place? How much silage is left? And what is the quality of that silage? And I suppose for other people, they haven't even walked the farm yet and need to establish the grass supply. So they're the questions that need to be asked. For someone like me who visits yards, the level of silage availability now is getting concerning for many farmers, particularly in the south, I would say, which is kind of a reflection of last year's growth pattern through the droughts this summer. What I do notice in particular is the supply of quality silage is also of great concern because while some farms have silage, actually the quality is not good enough for milking cows, really. But then if I throw it the other way, the average dairy farm at this stage has about the equivalent of 2 bales of round bale silage in grass sitting on the farm. If you do it per milking cow, you have about 3 bales sitting on the farm. So there's feed there. It's a challenge to get to it, but I suppose, we'll have to try and make a stab at this now. And we're going to put an effort in this, I suppose, through the series of podcasts we'll do this week and the series of videos that we're going to do to Grass10. You'll see more of this. But I suppose, irrespective of the silage quantity or quality, every effort has to be made now to get grazing, I suppose. I have to fully accept that this is not going to be easy. The paddocks will have to be, chosen right. The weather has to be somewhat right to get going. The weather paddocks won't get grazed, I accept that. The cow needs to be ready. It's not unusual for me to see cows go out and start lying down after an hour. That means there's something wrong inside in terms of their diet. They're just too full going out. The farmer will have to be a willing party in this and quite flexible. The weather pattern, I suppose, for the foreseeable future will be largely mild, but rainfall will continue, and if anything, will be a little bit above average from what we know. So, from the farmer's perspective, that now, if you're going to try to get grazing, there's going to be flexibility required by both the cows and the farmer. And this brings us on to, using an on-off grazing approach to gain access to grazed grass. And that's what's required now. The idea of waiting for the dry week and get all the cows out and sit back and relax, I don't see that happening, right? Just for the record, for the figures this week, the average farm cover in PBI is about 850 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, has been that for the last 4 weeks. The growth is around 5 or 6 kilos, which it has been for the last 4 weeks as well. But within that figures, averages can tell lies or hide the truth, I suppose. 50% of farms have low levels of grass on dairy farms, and 50% of farms have lots of grass, right? And if you're in the camp of low grass availability, concerns about silage quality, concerns about silage quantity, like there's budgeting and planning required here now, right? It's not unusual for me to see, surplus animals on farms and cull cows, and other feed would need to be sourced. So I suppose just keep that in mind. But sure, for the farmers who are short of silage or short of quality silage, then there must be an attempt, to try and get some grass into the cows, especially where dry land is available. I suppose, this requires a bit of planning now, and this comes back to to on-off grazing. On-off grazing is probably now the most important tool available to farmers when conditions are challenging to get grass into the animal. It enables cows to get some level of grass in their diet, gives a respite to farmers to clean out the sheds and do things like that. We all know the rewards are high, but it takes a bit of planning and preparation and flexibility to get going. A good intake of grass can be got over a short period of time, and I'm the first to admit that we're not going to get massive intakes, but it is worth chasing that, right? And in order for that to happen, then the farm must be walked and the best places to graze identified. If we, change to our feature farmer now this week, Shane Seymour, in fairness to Shane, he started grazing early on in February and had a good supply of grass with an average farm cover over 1150. At this stage, there's 200 cows to calve, of which 60% have already calved. He'll have 90% calved by Paddy's Day. There's grass going in through on-off grazing, plus 5 kilos meal, plus high-quality bale silage. I'd say at this stage, about 20% of the farm graze on Shane's farm. But he's forced to admit that has been very difficult because it's been very wet to keep cows at grass while trying to limit damage. He made the comment that he had earmarked some paddocks for reseeding, and that gave him some relief to get grass into animals and not to be as concerned about damage, which is a fair point to make. At this stage, 60% of the milking platform is spread with 2,500 gallons of slurry in January through the umbilical system. There's no chemical fertilizer out yet, but he's waiting to go with 30 units of protected urea per acre. So that's Shane's update. Got grass in, but had to work at it, and it hasn't been easy. Speaking of farms and events, there are grazing events planned next week in Kerry, in Daly's, in Scartaglen, and in Sunford Farm in Liscarroll and Mallow. Now, this has been a longer podcast than normal, but felt I had to do so. So if you'd like to hear more from the Grass10 team, subscribe to the Grass10 weekly newsletter, which is available on the Grass10 page on the Teagasc public website. And the link to newsletter is also available in the description of this podcast. We'd like to thank those who support the Grass10 campaign: AIB, Grass10 Agro, Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, FBD and the Farmers Journal. This has been your Grass10 update, and I'll talk to you all next week when hopefully things will have improved a bit, which they are scheduled to do.